The cargo hold of the Wandering Star smelled like oil and recycled air. Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair, watching the stars drift past on the view screen. They had been hauling mining equipment for 3 weeks now, and he was getting bored. The route to the frontier colonies was always the same. Jump, drift, jump again. Nothing ever changed. Amy sat at the pilot station, her fingers dancing across the controls. She was humming something under her breath, some old Earth song that Jake didn't recognize. Behind them, Ben was probably in the engine room, tinkering with something that didn't need fixing. That was just what Ben did when he got restless, and Lisa was likely in her quarters, reading medical journals on her tablet. It was a small crew for a small ship. Just the 4 of them, moving goods from one side of known space to the other. The pay was decent, and they didn't have to answer to anyone except the shipping company. Jake liked it that way. No complications, no drama, just honest work. The communications console beeped. It was a soft sound, almost polite. Amy glanced at it and frowned. "That's weird," she said. Jake looked over. "What is it?" "Just some static, I think. Probably interference from that nebula we're passing." Amy tapped a few buttons, but the beeping continued. "Huh. Actually, it might be something else." Jake stood up and walked over to her station. The screen showed a wave pattern, faint and irregular. It pulsed every few seconds, like a heartbeat that was almost gone. "Can you clean it up?" he asked. Amy worked the controls, adjusting filters and boosting the signal strength. Slowly, the pattern became clearer. It wasn't random static. It was a transmission, very old and very weak. "It's a distress signal," Amy said quietly. Jake felt something tighten in his chest. "From who?" "I don't know. The language is..." "Wait." Amy pulled up the translation database. The computer thought for a moment, then displayed a result. The name meant nothing to Jake. He'd never heard of any species called the Valith. "Are they in our registry?" Amy checked. Her expression changed. "They're listed as extinct. The database says they disappeared about 70 years ago. No contact since then." Jake stared at the signal pattern on the screen. 70 years. That meant whoever sent this message had been calling for help for 7 decades, and no one had answered. The thought made him feel cold. "Where's it coming from?" he asked. Amy plotted the coordinates. "The Shroud Nebula. It's about 2 days off our current route." She looked up at him. "Jake, that area is marked as dangerous. Navigation hazards, radiation, all kinds of problems. There's a reason ships don't go there." Jake nodded slowly. He knew what she was saying. Going into the nebula would be risky. It would also cost them their delivery contract. The mining equipment they were carrying had a deadline, and if they missed it, the company would dock their pay, maybe even fire them. But someone had been calling for help for 70 years. "Get Ben and Lisa up here," Jake said. Amy raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She keyed the intercom. Lisa came from the crew quarters, still holding her tablet. "What's going on?" Ben asked. Jake pointed at the screen. "We picked up a distress signal. It's old, really old, and it's coming from inside the Shroud Nebula." Lisa moved closer to look. 70 years old? That can't be right. "The computer doesn't lie," Amy said. "Someone's been broadcasting for 7 decades. Ben whistled low. "That's a long time to wait for help. Too long." Lisa added softly. Jake looked at each of them in turn. "I'm thinking we should check it out. See if anyone's still alive. But I won't order you. This is a volunteer mission. It means losing our cargo contract, and it means going into dangerous space. If you want to vote no, I'll understand." There was silence in the cockpit. Amy was the first to speak. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about Earth," she said, "about the old days, before we got into space. She said the worst thing humans ever did was walk past people who needed help. She said we had to be better than that." Amy looked at Jake. I vote yes. Ben shrugged. I've always wanted to see inside a nebula. The engineering data alone would be worth it. I'm in. I'm in. I'm time to see the time Alephit. I'm W. Abound. Abound. Lisa nodded. As a medic, I took an oath. It doesn't matter if the patient is human, or alien, or 70 years dead. If there's even a chance someone needs help, we have to try. Yes, from me. Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd known his crew would back him up, but it still felt good to hear them say it. Then it settled. Amy. Set a new course. Let's go find out who's been calling. Amy's fingers flew across the controls. The ship's engines hummed louder as they changed direction. On the view screen, the distant smudge of the Shroud Nebula grew slowly larger. 2 days to the nebula edge, Amy announced. After that, we navigate by instruments and luck. Jake settled back into his chair. He thought about the signal, pulsing out into the void for 70 years. He thought about the Valith, whoever they were, waiting and hoping that someone would hear them. The galaxy was a big place, and it was easy for voices to get lost in all that emptiness. But not today. Today, someone was listening. The wandering star flew on through the dark, chasing a ghost signal toward a forgotten corner of space. Behind them, their cargo contract ticked toward a missed deadline. Ahead, the nebula waited, full of mysteries and dangers. Jake didn't care about the contract anymore. Some things were more important than money or safety or following the rules. Some things were about being human, about being the kind of people who answered when someone called for help, even if that call had been echoing through the void for 70 years. The Shroud Nebula looked beautiful from a distance. Clouds of purple and blue gas swirled in patterns that seemed almost alive. But as the wandering star got closer, Jake could see why other ships avoided this place. The scanner showed debris everywhere, pieces of metal and rock floating in chaotic patterns. The radiation meter kept climbing into the yellow zone. This is going to be rough, Amy said from the pilot's seat. Her hands gripped the controls tighter than usual. I'm seeing at least 15 different navigation hazards in our path, and that's just the big stuff. Ben came up from the engine room, looking worried. The shields are holding, but I don't know for how long. This radiation is nasty. We're not built for this kind of environment. Jake nodded. Do your best. How much longer until we reach the signal source? Amy checked her instruments. Maybe 3 hours, if we don't hit anything. Those 3 hours felt like 3 days. The ship shook and rattled as Amy guided them through the debris field. Alarms beeped constantly, warning about radiation spikes and collision risks. Ben ran back and forth between the bridge and the engine room, keeping everything working. Lisa prepared the medical bay. Just in case. Jake watched the scanner, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The debris wasn't natural. These were pieces of ships, stations, and structures. Something terrible had happened here. Something big enough to destroy an entire civilization. I'm picking up more wreckage, Amy said. Large pieces, all around us. This whole area is like a graveyard. She was right. As they went deeper into the nebula, they saw more and more ruins. Broken hull plates drifted past their windows. Shattered station modules tumbled slowly through space. Jake saw what looked like a destroyed cargo ship, split in half and frozen in the void. The Valith must have had a whole fleet here, Lisa said from behind them. She'd come up to see. What could have done this? Nobody answered. They didn't know. Finally, Amy's console beeped with a different tone. I've got it. The signal source. It's dead ahead. About 10 kilometers. Jake leaned forward. On the view screen, he could see a massive shape emerging from the purple clouds. It was a ship, bigger than anything he'd ever seen. The hull was dark and pitted with age, covered in frost and debris. Parts of it were torn open, exposing internal structures to space. But despite the damage, it was still recognizable as a vessel. That's a generation ship, Ben whispered. Look at the size of it. They must have been trying to evacuate their whole population. Amy brought the wandering star closer, moving carefully through the surrounding debris. The alien ship grew larger and larger on the screen until it filled their entire view. It must have been 5 kilometers long, maybe more. I'm detecting a power source, Amy said. Very faint. But it's there. Coming from the central section. Quote, That's where the distress beacon is, Ben added, checking his own instruments. It's running on some kind of backup reactor. After 70 years, that's incredible engineering. Jake studied the dead ship. Can we dock? Amy circled around, scanning for intact airlocks. Most of the ship was too damaged, but she found one section that looked stable. There. That airlock looks functional. I think I can match it. The docking procedure took 20 minutes of careful maneuvering. Amy worked in silence, her face tight with concentration. When the clamps finally locked into place with a solid thunk, everyone let out a breath they'd been holding. We're attached, Amy announced. The airlock is holding pressure. Jake stood up. Ben, Lisa, suit up. We're going in. Amy, you stay here and monitor the ship. Amy looked like she wanted to argue, but she nodded. Someone had to stay with the wandering star in case things went wrong. The 3 of them put on their environment suits in the airlock. The suits were bulky and uncomfortable, but necessary. They had no idea what the atmosphere was like inside the alien ship, if there was any atmosphere at all. Ben opened the outer door. Beyond it was the alien airlock, dark and silent. Emergency lights flickered weakly along the walls, barely providing enough light to see. Jake stepped through first, his suit lights cutting through the gloom. The alien ship was cold. The temperature reading on his suit showed -30 degrees. Frost covered every surface, making the walls sparkle in their lights. The air was gone, vented into space through the hull breaches long ago. They moved slowly through corridors that were too wide and too tall for humans. The Valith had been bigger than people, Jake realized. Everything was built on a larger scale. Their boots made no sound in the vacuum. But Jake could hear his own breathing inside his helmet, loud and steady. Lisa found the first body in what looked like a common area. It was lying on the floor, covered in frost. The Valith had smooth skin and long limbs, with a face that was almost human, but not quite. There were features like gills on the neck, and the fingers had webbing between them. Amphibian, Lisa said quietly. They probably came from a water world. They found more bodies as they went deeper. The Valith had died at their posts, trying to keep their ship running until the end. Jake saw one sitting at a control station, hands still on the controls. Another was collapsed in a hallway, as if they'd been running somewhere. When death finally came, Ben led them to the central section, following the power readings. They found a room full of computer equipment, most of it dead, but one console, still glowing with faint light. The distress beacon was here, a small device connected to the backup reactor. It's been broadcasting automatically, Ben said, examining it. Once they set it up, it just kept going, over and over, calling for help. Jake looked around the room. There were data terminals everywhere, screens dark and silent. Can you access their logs? I want to know what happened here. Ben plugged a cable from his suit into one of the terminals. It took a few minutes, but he managed to power it up. The screen flickered to life, showing text in the Valith language. Ben's suit computer began translating. The logs told a grim story. The Valith had fled from their homeworld when a plague broke out. A terrible disease that killed quickly and spread faster. They'd loaded everyone they could onto ships and run, hoping to find refuge somewhere in the galaxy. They sent distress signals to every species they knew. They begged for help, for medicine, for sanctuary. The logs showed the dates and times of each transmission. No one had answered. No one had come. Ship after ship had passed close enough to hear their calls. The logs recorded them all. Dozens of vessels that could have helped, but chose not to. They were afraid of the plague, afraid of getting involved, afraid of the cost. So the Valith had died alone, drifting in the nebula, waiting for help that never came. The plague had taken them one by one, until there was no one left to send messages, no one left to hope. Jake felt sick. The galaxy had abandoned these people. They'd heard the calls for help and decided it wasn't their problem. There's something else, Lisa said. She was standing by a doorway on the far side of the room. You need to see this. Jake and Ben followed her through the door. Beyond was a corridor that led down, deeper into the ship. At the end was a heavy door with a blinking green light. That light means power, Ben said. Active power, not just backup. Jake reached out and pressed the door control. It hissed and slowly opened. Inside was a room full of white pods, arranged in neat rows, 20 of them, each one glowing with soft blue light. Frost covered the outside, but through the transparent sections, Jake could see small figures inside. Children, Valith children, sleeping in cryogenic suspension, and according to the monitors, they were still alive. Lisa moved to the nearest pod, her hands shaking as she checked the readings. The display was in Valith symbols, but her suit computer translated them into numbers she could understand. Heart rate, brain activity, body temperature, all stable, all alive. They're really alive, she whispered. After 70 years, they're still alive. Jake counted the pods again. 20 children, ranging from what looked like toddlers to teenagers. Their skin had a slight blue tint, and they floated peacefully in the suspension fluid, unaware that their entire civilization had died around them. Ben was examining the cryogenic system. This is amazing technology. The pods are connected to that backup reactor, the same one powering the distress beacon. Whoever designed this built it to last. He pointed at a control panel. Look, there's a medical station here. Lots of data files. Lisa went to the panel and began downloading information to her suit computer. As the files transferred, her eyes widened. There are medical records here. Research notes. The Valith scientists were working on a cure for the plague. Did they find one? Jake asked. Lisa scrolled through the data, reading quickly. Yes, they did. Right before the end, they developed a vaccine. These children were all immunized before being put into cryosleep. She looked up at Jake. They're not carriers. They can't spread the disease. They're safe. Jake felt his heart pounding. These weren't just survivors. They were the last of their kind, preserved by parents who had died hoping someone would find them. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical thing. Can we move them? He asked. Ben ran some calculations on his suit computer. The pods are self-contained. We could detach them from the ship's power system and run them on portable generators. But, he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. But what? But our ship isn't designed for this. We'd have to put them in the cargo hold. Life support would be stretched to the limit. We're talking about 20 living beings. Jake, that's a lot of oxygen, a lot of water, a lot of everything. Lisa crossed her arms. We can't just leave them here. I'm not saying we should, Ben replied. I'm just saying it's going to be hard. Really hard. Jake looked at the sleeping children. He thought about Earth, about all the times in human history when people had been abandoned. The refugees turned away at borders. The disaster victims left to die because helping was too expensive or too difficult. Humanity had been on both sides of that equation, and they'd learned painful lessons from it. We're taking them, Jake said firmly. All of them. I don't care how hard it is. Ben nodded. Okay, then we need to work fast. I'll go back to the Wandering Star and set up the cargo hold. We'll need to rig life support, set up the generators, make space for the pods. Give me 2 hours. Lisa stepped forward. I'll start prepping the children for transport. Some of these pods look like they haven't been maintained in decades. We need to be careful. Jake agreed. I'll help you. Let's get to work. Ben left, heading back through the frozen corridors to their ship. Jake and Lisa began examining each pod carefully, checking seals and connections. The Valith engineers had built these systems to last, but 70 years was a long time. Some of the pods showed signs of wear. As they worked, Lisa talked quietly. Do you know what this means? We're going to be responsible for the last members of an entire species. If we mess this up, the Valith go extinct for real. Then we won't mess up, Jake said. It's not that simple. I'm a medic, not a xenobiologist. I don't know anything about Valith physiology. What if they have medical needs I can't meet? What if one of them gets sick? Jake paused in his work and looked at her. Lisa, you're the best medic I know. You've kept this crew healthy for 5 years, in some pretty rough situations. If anyone can do this, it's you. She smiled a little. You always know what to say. It's a gift. Jake said with a grin. They kept working. After what felt like forever, Ben's voice came over the radio. Cargo hold is ready. Bring them over. Cargo. 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 Cargo hold is ready. Moving the pods was delicate work. Each one had to be carefully disconnected from the ship's power system and attached to a portable generator that Ben had rigged up. Then they had to be guided through the corridors, through the airlock, and into the Wandering Star's cargo hold. It took 6 trips to move all 20 pods. By the time they finished, Jake's arms ached and his suit was covered in frost. But all the children were safely aboard their ship, arranged in rows in the cargo hold. The generators hummed quietly, keeping the pods powered. Temporary life support systems pumped air and regulated temperature. Amy met them as they came out of their suits. I've been running the numbers, she said. It's going to be tight. Really tight. We have enough air and water for maybe 3 weeks if we're careful. Food will last longer. But we'll need to ration. 3 weeks to the nearest inhabited system? Jake asked. Amy nodded. Port Meridian. It's a major hub. Good medical facilities. But the route is rough. We'll have to go through some dangerous areas. Ben wiped sweat from his forehead. The ship isn't going to like carrying this much extra mass. I'll have to push the engines harder than recommended. We might have breakdowns. Can you handle it? Jake asked. Do I have a choice? Jake smiled. Not really. Lisa was already in the cargo hold, setting up a monitoring station. She'd pulled up the Valith medical files and was studying them intently. I need to understand their biology before they wake up, she said. Some of these pods are set to begin revival procedures automatically once they're stable. Could be days, could be hours. Jake left her to her work and went back to the bridge with Amy. She was plotting their course, calculating jumps and fuel consumption. The route she'd laid out avoided most of the major shipping lanes, taking them through empty space and around nebulas. Why this way? Jake asked. Faster, Amy said simply. The main routes would be safer, but they'd take longer. Every day matters, with our life support this stretched. Besides, I figure we've already survived one dangerous trip. What's a few more? Jake watched her work, admiring her skill. Amy had been flying ships since she was 16, and it showed. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, making tiny adjustments that would save them fuel and time. Thanks for doing this, he said quietly. Amy glanced at him. Did you think I wouldn't? No. But I'm still grateful. She turned back to her console. My grandmother's stories, remember? We don't walk past people who need help. That's what makes us human. Jake settled into the captain's chair. Through the view screen, he could see the dead Valith ship floating in the nebula, still broadcasting its distress signal to empty space. In a few minutes, they'd undock and begin the journey to Port Meridian. 20 alien children were counting on them, even if they didn't know it yet. The journey would be hard. Resources would run low. Systems would break down. But Jake had faith in his crew. They were stubborn, resourceful, and too stupid to quit when things got tough. In other words, they were human. Amy initiated the undocking sequence. The clamps released with a clunk, and the wandering star drifted away from the derelict. As they turned and accelerated, Jake took one last look at the generation ship. "Goodbye," he said softly. "We'll take care of them. I promise." The ship disappeared into the purple clouds behind them. Ahead lay 3 weeks of danger, privation, and uncertainty. But somewhere at the end of that road was safety, hope, and a second chance for a species that everyone else had forgotten. The wandering star's engines burned bright as they jumped into the dark. The first child woke up on day 3. Lisa was in the cargo hold when the pod's alarm started beeping. She ran to it and saw a small Valith girl stirring inside, her eyes opening slowly. The cryo-suspension fluid was draining away automatically, and the pod was beginning its revival sequence. Lisa keyed the intercom. "Jake, get down here. One of them is waking up." By the time Jake arrived, the pod had opened. The little girl sat up, coughing and confused. She was maybe 6 years old, with smooth blue-green skin and huge dark eyes. When she saw Lisa and Jake, she made a sound that might have been a scream, but her throat was too dry. "It's okay," Lisa said softly, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. "We're here to help." The girl didn't understand the words, but maybe she understood the tone. She stopped trying to scream and just stared at them with wide, frightened eyes. Lisa had water ready, and she offered it in a clear container. The girl hesitated, then reached out with trembling hands and drank. Over the next few days, more children woke up. Each time was frightening for them. They'd gone to sleep 70 years ago, surrounded by their parents and their people. Now they woke up to strangers who looked nothing like them, speaking a language they didn't know. Some cried. Others went quiet and wouldn't speak at all. Lisa did her best to comfort them. She learned quickly that the Valith children responded well to gentle touches and soft voices. She set up a corner of the cargo hold with blankets and cushions, creating a space that felt safer than the cold metal floor. Ben fabricated some simple toys, using the ship's small manufacturing unit. But language was a problem. The translation software could handle written Valith, but spoken language was harder. The children spoke in whistles and clicks, mixed with words, and the computer struggled to keep up. Lisa and Jake had to communicate mostly through gestures and patience. The oldest child, a teenage boy, seemed to understand their situation better than the others. He helped calm the younger ones, holding them when they cried, and helping Lisa distribute food. His name sounded like Kier when he said it, and he seemed to have some basic grasp that these strange creatures had rescued them. Life on the ship got harder every day. The air started to taste stale as the recyclers worked overtime. The temperature fluctuated wildly because the environmental controls couldn't handle the extra load. Everyone was always either too hot or too cold. Ben practically lived in the engine room, fixing problems as fast as they appeared. The main reactor was running at maximum capacity, and it wasn't designed for that kind of stress. Components burned out regularly. Ben replaced them with spare parts. And when the spare parts ran out, he started fabricating new ones, or improvising repairs that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Amy spent her shifts at the pilot station, navigating through dangerous space on minimal sleep. The route she'd chosen was full of hazards. Asteroid fields, gravity wells, radiation zones. Each one required her full attention to get through safely. She was running on coffee and determination, her eyes red from staring at screens for hours. Food and water were rationed strictly. The crew gave most of their portions to the children, who needed more nutrients as their bodies recovered from decades of suspended animation. Jake watched his crew get thinner and more tired, but none of them complained. "We're fine," Amy said when he tried to give her extra rations. "The kids need it more." That was when Jake started to understand something. His crew was doing things that would kill most species in the galaxy. They were operating on minimal sleep, breathing stale air, eating barely enough to survive. The temperature swung from 15 degrees to 30 degrees Celsius every few hours. The ship rattled and shook constantly from engine stress, and they just kept going. Humans were from Earth, a death world where everything was trying to kill you. Extreme temperatures, dangerous predators, diseases, natural disasters. Human evolution had been shaped by surviving impossible conditions. Other species needed careful climate control and regular meals. Humans could adapt. Lisa showed this truth most clearly. The Valith children were fragile after 70 years in cryosleep. Their immune systems were weak, their bodies struggling to adjust. They got sick easily, developing fevers and breathing problems. Lisa treated them with limited supplies and improvised medicine. Most species in the galaxy wouldn't survive this, she told Jake one night. But we grew up on a planet where everything was dangerous. Our ancestors lived through plagues, famines, ice ages. They survived because they were stubborn and creative, and refused to die. She gestured at the cargo hold, where the children slept. These kids are fragile. But you know what? They're tougher than we thought. I've been giving them probiotics from our own gut bacteria, carefully controlled doses. It's helping strengthen their immune systems, and they're adapting to our environment, learning to handle the temperature swings and the stale air. Is that safe? Jake asked. Lisa shrugged. Probably not. But it's working. Sometimes the best medicine isn't the safest medicine. It's the medicine that keeps people alive. On day 12, the main water recycler broke down. Ben worked on it for 18 hours straight, taking it apart and putting it back together 3 times. Finally, he got it running again, but it was operating at only 60% efficiency. They had to ration water even more strictly. Everyone's lips cracked from dehydration. The children didn't understand why they couldn't have more water, and it hurt to deny them. But there wasn't enough. There just wasn't enough. Kier, the oldest child, started helping more. He organized the younger ones, teaching them to share and to be patient. He learned some basic human words from Lisa, and he taught the crew some Valith phrases in return. Communication got a little easier. On day 15, one of the little ones got really sick. Her fever spiked to dangerous levels, and she started having trouble breathing. Lisa worked through the night. Using every trick she knew, she gave the girl fluids, cooled her down with wet cloths, administered antibiotics that might or might not work on Valith physiology. Jake sat with Lisa, helping hold the girl steady while she worked. "Will she make it?" he asked. "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "I'm doing everything I can. But I'm not a Valith doctor. I don't know if these medicines will help or hurt." The girl survived. Her fever broke at dawn, and she opened her eyes, weak but alive. Lisa nearly cried with relief. On day 18, the port engine started making a bad sound. Ben said it was a bearing wearing out. Something that should have been replaced months ago, but they'd been putting off. Now, it was critical. If it failed completely, they'd lose half their propulsion. Ben couldn't fix it properly without docking at a station, so he did the next best thing. He disabled half the safety protocols, adjusted the engine timing, and basically held the whole thing together with prayers and stubbornness. It shouldn't have worked. By every reasonable engineering standard, the engine should have exploded, but it kept running. "How are you doing this?" Jake asked, watching Ben make another impossible repair. Ben grinned, his face streaked with grease. "I grew up in Detroit, fixing cars with my dad. He taught me that machines are like people. They can do more than they think they can if you push them hard enough and believe in them." He patted the engine. "This old girl's got more fight in her. She'll get us there." On day 20, they finally saw Port Meridian on the long-range scanners. Amy let out a whoop of joy. "We're going to make it!" But they weren't there yet. They still had 3 days of travel, and resources were almost gone. The air was so stale it made everyone dizzy. Water was down to emergency reserves. Food was down to nutrition bars and recycled protein paste. The crew shared what little they had with the children. They went hungry so the kids could eat. They breathed harder so the kids could breathe easier. They stayed awake so the kids could sleep safely. On day 23, the wandering star limped into Port Meridian's outer detection range. Amy sent out a general distress call. Within minutes, station security responded. "This is Port Meridian Control to unidentified vessel. State your emergency." Amy keyed the transmit button. Her voice was hoarse from dehydration. "This is the cargo ship Wandering Star. We are carrying 20 Valith survivors rescued from the Shroud Nebula. Request immediate medical assistance and docking clearance." There was a long pause. Then, "Did you say Valith survivors?" "The Valith are extinct." Amy smiled tiredly. "Not anymore." Port Meridian was chaos. The moment the Wandering Star docked, security teams surrounded them. Officers in environmental suits rushed aboard, scanning for biohazards and demanding explanations. Medical teams stood ready with quarantine equipment. Station administrators argued over procedures, while news reporters tried to push their way past security barriers. Jake stood in the docking bay, exhausted and angry. "We need medical help for the children now, not paperwork." A Zentari official, her scales shimmering with agitation, blocked his path. "You cannot bring unverified xenobiological specimens onto this station without proper clearance. The quarantine protocols require..." "1. They're not specimens," Jake interrupted. "They're children. They're scared. They're tired. And some of them are sick. Now get out of my way, or I'll move you myself." The official's crest flared with indignation. But before she could respond, Lisa emerged from the ship with one of the smaller Valith children in her arms. The little girl was crying, overwhelmed by the noise and confusion. Lisa held her close, speaking softly in broken Valith. The sight stopped the argument cold. News cameras focused on them, and Jake saw the moment when the galaxy realized these weren't specimens or samples. They were people. Living, breathing, frightened people who needed help. The medical teams finally moved in. They were professional and gentle, helping the Valith children off the ship and into proper medical facilities. Lisa went with them, refusing to leave until she was sure they were being treated properly. Kier, the oldest child, stayed close to her, translating when he could and comforting the younger ones. Jake, Amy, and Ben were taken to a debriefing room. More officials asked more questions. "Where did you find them? Why did you bring them here? Don't you know the risks?" The questions went on for hours. Finally, Jake had enough. He stood up and pulled out a data chip. "This contains the logs from the Valith generation ship. All of them. I want you to broadcast these logs on every public channel in the station." A Corvathi administrator looked shocked. "That's highly irregular. We need to review..." "Broadcast them," Jake said firmly, "or I'll find someone who will." The officials argued, but Jake was stubborn. Eventually, they agreed, probably just to shut him up. The logs were uploaded to the station's public network and broadcast across all channels. The galaxy watched. They saw the desperate messages from the Valith, begging for help. They saw the dates and timestamps of ships that had passed close enough to respond, but hadn't. They saw the names of those ships, their registries, their corporations and governments. The list was long. Dozens of vessels. Dozens of chances to save a dying species. All ignored. The response was immediate and explosive. News networks across known space picked up the story. Politicians gave speeches. Citizens protested. Some defended the non-intervention, saying the plague risk was too great. Others condemned it as moral cowardice. The debate raged for days. Meanwhile, the Valith children recovered in Port Meridian's medical facilities. With proper care, food, and rest, they started to heal. Xenobiologists and linguists came from across the sector to help, Studying the Valith language and culture through the children and the data from their ship, Jake visited them every day. Lisa practically lived at the medical center, overseeing their care and making sure the doctors understood Valith physiology. The children began to relax, realizing they were safe. Some even started to smile. Kier sought Jake out one afternoon. His galactic common was getting better every day. "Captain Morrison," he said carefully, "I want to thank you. You saved us when no one else would." Jake shook his head. "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do," Kier insisted. "I was old enough to remember when we left our home. I remember my parents putting me in the cryopod. They told me help would come. They believed it." His large eyes met Jake's. "They were wrong. But you proved they could have been right. Someone did come. Just took 70 years. The words hit Jake hard. He thought about all those ships that had passed by. All those captains who had heard the distress call and decided it wasn't their problem. They'd probably had good reasons. The plague risk, the cost, the inconvenience. All logical, all practical, all wrong. A week after their arrival, the Galactic Council called for a formal hearing. Jake was summoned to testify. He walked into the council chamber in his worn ship clothes, refusing to dress up for the occasion. The chamber was huge, with representatives from dozens of species sitting in tiered seats. A Quillian council member spoke first. Her voice translated into Galactic Common. "Captain Morrison, you violated numerous regulations by entering a quarantine zone, removing biological material, and transporting unverified organisms across multiple jurisdictions. How do you respond?" Jake looked up at the assembled representatives. "I respond by saying, I'd do it again. In fact, I hope I get the chance to do it again, because that would mean someone else is calling for help." There were shocked murmurs from the gallery. Another council member, this one a massive Thorian, spoke. "I saved 20 lives," Jake interrupted. 20 people who everyone else decided weren't worth saving. You want to punish me for that? Fine, but first, I want you to answer a question. He pointed at the council members. How many of your ships passed through the Shroud Nebula in the last 70 years? How many of you heard that distress call and turned away? Silence filled the chamber. Jake continued, his voice hard. I'm a cargo hauler from Earth. I don't have a fancy education, or a big ship, or political connections. But I know right from wrong, and abandoning people who need help is wrong. It doesn't matter if it's expensive, or risky, or inconvenient. You help anyway. That's what decent beings do. He pulled out another data chip and held it up. I'm proposing a new law. I'm calling it the Morrison Protocol. Though, honestly, I don't care what you call it. Here's what it says. Any spacefaring vessel that receives a distress signal must investigate and render aid if possible. No exceptions for inconvenience. No exceptions for cost. No exceptions because the people calling for help are different from you. A council member objected. That's impractical. Ships can't divert for every distress call. Why not? Jake challenged. Because it would hurt your profit margins? Because it would be uncomfortable? Tell that to the Valith who died waiting for someone to care enough to answer. The debate that followed was fierce. Some council members supported the proposal. Others opposed it on practical grounds. But the public was watching, and public opinion was strongly in favor. The news broadcasts had shown the Valith children recovering, shown Kier learning to laugh again, shown the youngest ones playing with toys that human volunteers had brought. The galaxy had seen what abandonment looked like, and they didn't like it. The Morrison Protocol passed 3 weeks later, with modifications and amendments. But the core principle remained. Distress calls must be answered. Jake didn't stay for the official ceremony. He was busy getting the Wandering Star repaired and supplied. Ben had a long list of parts to replace, and Amy was planning their next route. But before they left, Jake had one more visit to make. He found Kier in the education center, studying galactic history with the other Valith children. The boy's face lit up when he saw Jake. "You're leaving?" Kier asked. "Yeah. We've got cargo contracts to fulfill. Can't stay docked forever." Kier stood up. "Take me with you." Jake blinked. "What?" "I want to join your crew. I've been learning about human ships from Ben. He says I'm good with engineering systems." Kier straightened up, trying to look older than his 16 years. "The other children will be okay here. The council is setting up a cultural preservation program, making sure we remember our history. But I want to do more. I want to honor what you did for us." Jake studied the young Valeth. "It's dangerous work, long hours, low pay, and we mostly haul boring cargo. But sometimes you answer distress calls," Kier said. "Sometimes you save people. I want to be part of that." Jake looked at the determination in Kier's eyes and saw a reflection of his own stubborn nature. He smiled. "All right. But you start as an apprentice. Ben will work you hard." Kier's face broke into a wide smile. "I can handle hard work. I learned from watching you." 5 years later, the wandering star was in deep space when they picked up another distress signal. This one was faint and old, maybe 30 years broadcasting into the void. The language was Krillian, a species most people thought had been wiped out in a war. Amy looked at Jake. Ben paused in his work. Lisa stopped reading her medical journals. Kier, now a full member of the crew, waited at the engineering station. They all knew what came next. "How far off our route?" Jake asked. Amy calculated. 2 weeks. "We'd miss our delivery deadline again." Jake leaned back in his chair. "What do you think?" Around him, his crew smiled. "Set course," Amy said. "I'll prep the cargo hold," Ben added. "I'll get the medical bay ready," Lisa said. Kier's voice came over the intercom from engineering. "Engines are ready when you are, Captain." Jake looked at the faint signal on the screen, another forgotten voice calling out into the dark, but not forgotten anymore. Someone was listening now. Someone would answer. Because they were human. And humans remembered. The wandering star turned toward the signal, its engines burning bright in the endless night, chasing hope through the void.